Hello and welcome again to another episode of One Starfish, where our mission is to help change the world one starfish or one person at a time. As always, guys, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, share. It's how we get the word out. I'm excited for our guest today. I just met her. Katie K. May has a creative healing center she started over 10 years ago. She just wrote a book called You're on Fire, It's Fine, which sounds intriguing. I'm excited to have you on. Thanks for being here, Katie.
Thanks, Angela. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's go back. I mean, we touched on a little bit before. We just had a brief chat. Tell us a little bit of your upbringing and what got you into the healing space, and what's your vision and mission with your center? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so I myself was what I would call a troubled teen. I struggled a lot in my teenage years. I was raised by a single father who had no idea how to raise a daughter, let alone a highly emotional daughter like me. And that continued into my early 20s, where at that point, a surprise pregnancy changed, was the catalyst for me to change my perspective, to change my behaviors, because what I realized was that the world was so much bigger than the pain inside me. And it was really my responsibility to break a chain of dysfunction that had been continuing for many generations and to do something differently. And so my own personal introspection and work led me to go back to school to become a therapist and give back to others so that I could shorten the struggle that other families are experiencing and they can skip faster to the harmony, the health, the happiness that I now know how to achieve.
I love the one thing. How did you put it? The world is bigger than the pain that I am experiencing. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Guys, you didn't catch that. Write that down. That's really good. I'm like, how can I write this down? Yeah. Because sometimes we're in our own head about what's happening and we realize it's not just about us, I guess. So yeah, having a child kind of does that. So what are some things that that's so cool that you got into that. What are some things that I mean, this could be an all-day podcast, I'm sure, but what are some things that you think are the like first stepping stones, I guess, to create, you said harmony. I like that word, harmony in
Mhm.
families.
Yeah, so the first step for me, and I think for many healing modalities that you might look at, is recognizing that I bear the responsibility to make the changes. Because I could forever point to the fact that my mom left, or my dad was insensitive, or my situation sucked, right? But really, what I needed to do was look inward and reflect on how am I responding to my own emotions? How am I responding to other people in my life? And then what do I want to do about this? Because ultimately, I'm the only one that can make these changes. I can't force them on anybody else.
Hmm. And what do you think helps people, I guess, reach that? Like, it's hard to sometimes feel like they need to take full responsibility.
It absolutely is. It is a process. And I think the first step is that willingness. I want to do something differently, so I'm willing to look at this. And then I also want to acknowledge that we call it like window of tolerance, people's ability to hold their emotions varies person to person. Some people have the capacity to look inward and feel a lot of pain and work through that and process that. And other people might have an urge to shut that off more immediately or do something to make it go away. Work extra hard, drink alcohol, go for a run, whatever. And sometimes that's healthy. And when we do too much of anything, it becomes unhealthy. And so when we think about like, what do we need to do practically to get to this place? It's have an openness, have a curiosity, have a willingness. And most times I would say have a therapist or have a support person to help you work through and gain some perspective. Because just like you said, like when you're in this place of pain, it's really hard to see perspective outside of that. And you need other perspectives to help you really figure out who am I, where do I want to go, and how do I get there?
So here's a question. If you have someone in your life that's dealing with some of this, and maybe they're going to alcohol, or like you said, anything out of perspective is like alcoholism, workaholism, whatever it is. How do you support them without being like, you got a problem? Because you can't do that. I know that. So how do you support people in your life that are dealing with stuff and running to, whether it's yourself, actually, I mean, if you listen to this, whether it's yourself, but more like
Mhm.
on the supporting role to help someone get through some of that.
You know what? It's interesting because I think all of the examples I gave are things that I have actually personally experienced and went through. So it's easy for me to come up with examples. And it's actually, foundational chapters in my book where I talk about the why these behaviors show up. And so why these behaviors show up is because there is something that's going on inside an individual that's too big or too painful to deal with. And so a behavior shows up to make that emotion go down. And so when we think about it that way, it becomes easier to empathize with another person instead of saying, you have a problem, and, being judgmental in our language and making that person feel defensive or want to back off. We can instead seek to connect with what's under the surface. Like, wow, you must really be struggling right now. What's going on with you? I'm here for you. I'm here to listen. And being able to kind of look under the tip of the iceberg to understand what's driving these behaviors so that we can connect with the emotion rather than judge the behavior.
That's really good. Yeah, I like that. So, and if someone's like struggling with, so let's, like you mentioned the book. First of all, let's talk about your book. So, what inspired you to write the book? Tell us the title of the book because I think it's cool, and we talked about it. But like, what inspired you to write it? And tell us a little bit about the book because I feel like this ties into everything.
It's all related. Yeah. So the book is called You're on Fire, It's Fine: Tagline Effective Strategies for Parenting Teens with Self-Destructive Behaviors. What inspired me to write the book? So I want to say two parts. Since I was 6 years old, I've wanted to be an author. I've been writing since as long as I can remember. So really, it was a lifelong dream to have a published book.
Oh, cool.
The topic of this book and how it came about was, and it is a blend of my personal story as a teen, my personal story as a parent of a child who has mental health concerns, and then my professional experience over a decade plus of supporting families like this. And how it came about was that I lead a team in the Philadelphia area of other therapists. And we started out as teen therapists. So we worked with teens. We didn't work with parents. We wanted to work with teens. But after about 4 years of recognizing that parents were really hungry for information. They were writing paragraphs long emails. They were saying, but what do I do? How do I help? Or sometimes they were getting in the way of teens getting better because they had their own anxiety or impulsive behaviors to make their own emotions go away. We decided that we needed a parent program. And so the book is based off the framework of the parent program that I run at my centers in Philadelphia. And I wanted to make sure it was accessible all over the place because I know that teens and families aren't just struggling in the greater Philadelphia area.
So tell us a little bit about the book. What are some tangible things that parents, I guess, is that's what it's written for, can do to help their kids emotionally deal with stuff so maybe they're not as got as many issues as adults. I don't know how to put that.
We're fine in that way. Yeah. I mean, that first step is always recognizing that the problem for the teen or the problem for the parent is actually a solution for the teenager. We've already talked about that. If your teen is self-harming, if your teen is using drugs or alcohol, it's probably because they have some deeper pain or emotion that they're not ready to feel or look at, and they need support with that. But beyond understanding that foundation, a lot of the book really focuses on helping parents recognize what they're experiencing and what to do with that. Because in any relationship, not just parent-child relationship, it's like a dance, it's transactional. So again, we'll go back to your example of if you point your finger at someone and say, you have a problem, their response is probably either going to be to push forward and argue or step back and withdraw and avoid the conversation. So neither of those things are effective. And as a parent, you want to figure out what is the effective thing for me to say and do so that I can get the result that I want from my child. One tool that is in the book and that people find really helpful is the parental stress meter. And it's basically like a 0 to 10 scale of how intense are my emotions? How triggered am I? And then because of that, what do I do? Do I step back and go cope by myself? Do I actually try and problem solve right now? So you have to know where you are to know what you can do that's effective.
Hmm. That takes some oomph, I'm sure. What are some, that's a good tangible one. So where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And I mean, I don't care if you have kids or not, I feel like that's a good one just to deal with. In leadership, that's a big thing. I feel like sometimes
Yes.
leadership is like coaching a bunch of kids. So except that they're adults and they think they know more. But I imagine it's very similar. I don't have kids, but I feel like it's similar.
It's very similar. I can speak to both. It's a
Okay.
lot alike.
What are some common, I don't know what you call them, common potholes that leaders and or parents do that maybe alienate, I don't know if that's quite the right word, but separate the child or that person from the leadership or from the parent?
Yeah, so I want to say common judgments that are alike in both places. And one of them is personalizing. They're doing this on purpose to upset me, or they're trying to take advantage of me. So that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I would see in both the parent and the leader roles is looking at someone else's behavior and making it about you. And then that triggers bigger feelings that trigger bigger responses from you or ineffective responses from you. The other thing is really putting things into these all or nothing or black and white categories, like she never gets her documentation done on time, or he never cleans his room when I ask him to. Because again, when we start to engage in these judgments, even me role modeling them right now, I can feel in my chest like getting agitated, like, oh, they
Mm-hmm.
never clean their room, like that sort of thing. So we want to really be mindful of noticing and naming the accurate thing that's happening, being accurate in our expression and our experience rather than putting it into these extreme categories. Because again, when we go to extremes, it makes emotions higher, it makes situations more intense than they need to be.
Hmm. I know I do that. Like, oh yeah, like when people don't answer you and you're like, oh, they don't like me. And sometimes like it's nothing to do with you. Um,
Exactly.
but I think, do you find, I'm curious actually, because you do this, do you find women have a harder time separating emotions like that than men as a whole, or do you not?
I think it's hard to generalize, especially considering that I have a husband who is on the more sensitive side, and sometimes I can fall into the other side of things. But so I would say, in general, people who are more in touch with their emotions, people who are more empathic, tend to struggle more in parenting and in leadership because what it really takes is being direct, is looking at the data or the goal and knowing what you need to do to move towards that. And sometimes that's uncomfortable when you're over focused on the other person's emotions. Like if you want to be someone's friend all the time, it's going to be hard to hold a boundary.
So how, and it's funny, I just talked to one of my leaders about this actually just yesterday. So how do you build that muscle? Maybe you are naturally an empathetic kind of person, which I think is a good trait for sure, but can
Mhm.
also be, taken unhealthily, I guess you could say. What are some ways that you can build that stronger leadership, like you're just talking about, I guess, while not losing the empathize side of you?
Yeah, I think it is definitely balancing both. For me, formulas and frameworks work really well. In therapy, there's a skill that we have. It's called Dear Man, and it's an acronym, but the gist of it is describing the situation. We'll go with the example of you're not doing your documentation because I'm a therapist. That's something that happens for us. So I might describe it and say, "Hey, I noticed that your documentation is late again today." Then you're expressing how you feel about it. I'm confused because we just had this conversation last week. The A in the dear is asserting or asking. So I might assert and say, I need you to get your documentation on time done this week. And then the R is to reinforce why that's important. Why that's important is this is an important part of your job. And if you can't meet this expectation, we might have to have a conversation about your role. And so it doesn't make it easier. I think I want to acknowledge that. Like, it's not like all of a sudden you don't have anxiety about it. You just have a structure for how to be effective while also holding empathy at the same time. You can be curious, you can listen to the other person's point of view, but at the end of the day, we all have a job to do in whatever role we're in at that time, as a parent, as a spouse, as a leader, whatever. And so we need to uphold the expectations of that role. And I think it would demonstrate a lack of respect for yourself or a lack of empathy for your own experience if you weren't able to do that. We don't want to diminish ourselves just to make someone else happy.
Hmm. Okay, so that's for the people pleaser kind of personality. And then we have the other people that are like, that doesn't matter. I don't like screw you. And they struggle more with the empathetic side. I would say I'm probably more on that side personally than the other way. Where it's like, I don't know, it's like, I don't know why you're crying. I don't get it.
So
So
you might actually need to increase
yes. So
validation
how
and
do you work on
empathy.
increasing? Yes, exactly. How do you work on increasing empathy without being fake about it, not being like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," but inside you're like, because I've done this. So like and I've worked on this and I feel like I got a lot better. But what are some tips that would help someone like me? And like I said, I'm stereotyping. I find a lot of my male colleagues are more this way, where they're able to just kind of distance the emotion and be more like, do your stuff. But
Yeah.
then they lose the empathy and then people don't connect. Um,
Yeah.
so what are some tips on the other side now to like build empathy while maintaining leadership?
Yeah, so the other side of it would be increasing validation. And interestingly enough, again, in my book, I have a whole chapter on validation,
Oh, cool.
including validation sentence starters. I feel like my next book should be leadership using the same skills
I
now that
think
we're
so
talking.
too. I feel like exactly the same.
Right. But so increasing validation, it doesn't mean that you agree with the other person, that you change your mind, that you're condoning their behavior. It's simply acknowledging their experience. So,
Hmm.
same situation on the other side. You need to get your notes done. Other person is crying, telling you they've been sick, they're struggling, they're having a hard time. Doesn't change the expectation, but increasing validation could be pausing and instead of just repeating the expectation, saying, I understand things have been hard for you right now. I get why this is a struggle. So it's allowing you to see them, for them to feel seen and heard, but it still doesn't change the expectation at the end of the day. But when you increase the validation, you're increasing the relational experience, so that the other person again feels seen, heard, understood, but they still have to do the thing you're asking them to do.
That's so good. But still do the thing. It's like
Yeah,
do
of
the thing.
course.
If you're listening to this, I'm sure a lot of A-type personalities are listening to this, and you're like, I don't really care what happened to your dog or your cat, but I mean, I really do. But like, you still have to do the thing. Like,
Well, it's both. I mean,
um,
I think I have that experience as a parent myself because my kid will be like, "You don't understand." And I'll say, like, "No, I do understand, but it doesn't change that you have to do this thing." So it's not, you're not changing your mind just because someone else is upset. You can understand they're upset and hold the expectation.
hmm. That's good. And so, what are some things like now, because this is what you're specifically talking about kids, and I don't have kids, so I feel totally out of my realm. But what are some things that help you? So you have to set expectations. What do you suggest, or do you go into it like actual ways to like, because I know like I hear parents like their kids are out past curfew or whatever, or they're out whatever. They're doing lots of stuff they probably shouldn't be doing at a younger age than they should be doing stuff. How do you actually physically like, or what ideas do you have to actually how do you control that and still like you can't control it because they're still little humans. So
Yeah.
like what are
Well,
some of the
so
things that you found tangibly that help? I'm curious. I have no
I mean,
idea.
I think the secret, as well as like the constant struggle for all of us and everything, is that control is an illusion. We have no control over
That's
anything
what I
going
was thinking.
on.
I'm like,
And
oh goodness.
so part of it is understanding what you need to cope with and what's outside of your control. And then the other side is having rules and systems that align with your values. And I can say this for both sides, for parents and for companies, because I own several companies and we have company values and we have systems that align with that. And we have expectations and we have disciplinary actions if people fall off track with that. And it's the same thing when you're parenting. It's not this rigid over control because that's not helpful either. We're not teaching children, teens to just follow rules. We want to teach them how to become independent, healthy, fulfilled, successful adults. And to
Hmm.
do that, they need to have some self-agency and make decisions and have choices. And so we can kind of put the bumpers on that to say, you know, I feel like curfew is a thing that people talk about that I don't necessarily experience personally. Like, I don't know. We can track kids on their phone right now. Like my kid knows that I do. So I think there are things that kind of
Cool.
have safety features built in that maybe aren't as, we don't need to react the way that people sometimes react to them. But maybe it's bigger for other parents than it is for me. So I can't speak for everyone's experience. But in general, I would say that rules come from your values and come from what's important to you as a family and important to your home environment. Safety is a big priority. And in addition to that, it's like, what can you let go of and what's a non-negotiable for you? And, everything doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10. I don't know if that makes sense,
Yeah,
but like,
totally. And
yeah.
it kind of brings me to another question on that, that I was thinking about because I think this is something, like I said, I struggle on, is kind of like a power trip. So there's an ego involved. Like I
Mhm.
said, I know leadership, a little bit,
Yeah.
I'm learning it. Don't know much about kids, but I feel it's the same. So there's some ego, like how can a parent work through that or leader or whatever,
Mhm.
and not let the ego become the thing because and still have rules. Like there's such a line. Like you still gotta have your rules, but like sometimes
Yeah.
it's like I'm the boss and you'll listen to me, or I'm the mom and like I remember my parents, like I'm the mom, you just do what I say. It's just what
Yeah.
but still have that. Like, what are some of your thoughts on that and how that's maybe changed over the years as people have become more like independent, I guess, and not just like you can't just not blind faith anymore. People don't just like, you're the boss, I just do what you say. People don't do that really anymore in our culture. Or you're the
Right.
mom and I just like how I was raised. Like you just did what they told you to do. Now they're like, why do I have to do it? Like,
Well, and I think you just hit on it a little bit because it is a very authoritarian style of like, I'm in the dynamic of power and therefore you listen to me just because, right? It's do it because I said so. And I have a lot of strong opinions about this, but I think when people show up in that way, there's a couple things that come to mind. Either they were raised that way and that shows up in their leadership, in their parenting, in any other role where they are in the dominant position because that's how they've learned to be. And so some of what it takes to like unravel that is, I think, therapy is going back to what
mhm,
it was like for you to be in the flip side of that, what it was like for you to be in the child role or in the non-dominant position and how that was for you, because I almost think like it's an overcompensation. Like, um, if I have to be a heavy hand dominating and say, do it because I said so, it's probably because I don't have the right skills to align with someone and join with someone in a more connecting way that's going to be more effective and help the person want to do well rather than fear and do well. And that's
mhm.
totally how it is with parents and kids. Kids don't follow rules because you said so. They follow rules because they care about being seen, heard, loved, understood by you, and they want to do right by you. So the relationship is such an important aspect of that.
So on the therapy side, how, because actually I was just talking to a friend of mine yesterday. So how do you find like how do you, because I know like finding a therapist if you don't have one is important, but there's so many therapists, which is great. There's a reason for that. And if you find the
Yeah.
wrong one, quote, wrong one for you, you don't get out of it what you should. How do you find like do you have any ideas on tips on how to find a good therapist for, for somebody? Like what are some things that you want to like notice right away that you would know that would make it effective or not the relationship?
Yes, absolutely. So my top tip for this that's generalizable is to type into Google evidence-based therapy for X, whatever it is that you're looking for, anxiety, self-harm, parenting, because then you're going to find the specific types of therapy and therapists that are matched to what you are experiencing. If
Mm,
you just go for a general search of like therapists in Alberta or wherever you are, you're going
right.
to find general therapists who might be able to talk to you, have a conversation, tell you, oh yeah, that's a hard experience, but you might not get that actionable, structured, direct experience that can be helpful when you're struggling.
Okay, that's good. That's helpful. Evidence-based therapy in XYZ.
Yeah, so for whatever you're experiencing, like depression, anxiety, anger,
Okay.
you
Oh,
can
that's
find the right therapy for your presentation.
yeah. And then when you meet someone, just kind of see how you, I guess, resonate, right? I imagine you'd feel it pretty quickly, relatively. And then you have a couple businesses, in Philadelphia, you said, in therapy, right? Primarily with parents or with everything. Tell me a little bit about your businesses out there. If someone's out in the area and stuff, like, let's talk a little bit about your businesses specifically.
Yeah, so in the Philadelphia area, I have Creative Healing. It's two teen support centers. We support primarily teenagers and their parents. And so we can support families, again, in person in the greater Philadelphia area, as well as across Pennsylvania, where we are licensed. And then I do have a second business where I actually teach marketing, business, leadership, systems, structure to other therapists. Because of my success in the field, I've been able to give back and I speak and teach nationally and have some courses and consulting around supporting other therapists in these areas if they're looking for that kind of support.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. And when you started your businesses, because a lot of people, like we said, are probably, up and coming entrepreneurs. When you started your businesses, was I'm always curious of this. Was everyone super supportive in your circle or like, oh yeah, you're going to start a business and start, getting other therapists in there and all this stuff that you've been doing, which is amazing. Was it pretty supportive or was it like, what are you doing, Katie?
So I remember I was working at a psychiatric hospital full time, and I told my husband that I wanted to start my own practice, and he was really scared. I mean, his risk tolerance is way
Lower.
lower than mine. I'm the risk taker in the relationship, and he was like, "Well, we have full-time benefits through your job, and this is a stable income." And so he was nervous, and it gave me pause for maybe a microsecond, but I know myself. I am an entrepreneur at heart, and so I took the leap, but I was really balancing a full-time job and building a business for almost 2 years before I left my job. And now I look back on that and I say to him things like, I think I'm going to invest in this thing. And he just says, I trust you. Everything you do turns out great. Like, do it. So that pause for him isn't there anymore. And it feels really right. And in terms of people that work for me, in the beginning, we were like scrappy building a business together. And then we got to a point where it was 12, 15, 18 people. And I felt like I hit a ceiling of I needed to change structure, needed to change systems, needed to do things differently. And I got a lot of pushback. And
Mhm.
so we had a couple years, especially in that pandemic period, where things were really hard. I think it was years when a lot of us were questioning, do I want to do this anymore? This is really hard. It feels really bad.
Mhm.
But now we're on the other side of that, and I have a super strong team, super strong culture, all the right people in all the right seats, and we're doing really well, and a really supportive environment. So I think that in any relationship, when you're making decisions and you're making changes in your life, somebody's going to be upset by it, but it doesn't mean that it's not the right decision. I always say, like,
Mhm.
pushback doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. You got to stay with your vision.
So wow, that's like powerful because a lot of people, especially if a spouse is like, I don't know about it, they'll step back. So
Yeah.
kudo to you and anyone that's listening. Another thing that I got out of that was she made the decision and she made it work. So a lot of people are like, I'm going to try this thing and then it doesn't work. And then they try this thing, it doesn't work. And that doesn't build the confidence. Now her husband's like, do whatever you want because she's built it. So if you're like listening and you're like, I want to start this business and my wife or husband won't support me and I just can't do it. But you're like, okay, I'm going to go try. But then you try, and you don't actually succeed. You're just building why they question you in the first place. So if you're going to start a business, make it freaking work. Do the work to make it work. When you had the pushback, I just find that was interesting too. When you had the pushback, you had about 15, 18 people working for you. Of those, as you started to change how you were doing things, curious,
Mhm.
how many stuck around and how many moved on?
We had 8 to 10 people turnover in that period, and
Yeah.
we hired new people in. And I think it's a really interesting experience. This is something I do coach a lot of other therapists on because they're afraid of that happening.
Yeah.
But really, what happens is you're saying, this is my vision, this is the system, this is where we're going. And people are then self-deselecting and saying, I don't want that. So I look at it as weeding the garden so the flowers can grow. Like, yes,
Yeah.
they are leaving, but when they leave, new people come in that don't know it any other way, and they make your life easier.
So good. I know we just had some people quit in our business here recently, and I was like, oh man. And then I'm like, all right, they're just making room for more better
Yes,
people. Like,
exactly.
woo. So all in perspective. So that's so good. I love that. Yeah, that's so yeah, if you're running a business and this is just reinforcing like what's your vision and head toward it. And if people have pushback, oh well. Just this is our vision. This is where we're going. You're coming with, well, you're not. It doesn't really matter. We're going anyway. um,
And it's okay
with
for
with
both of
empathy, with
you.
empathy. We gotta bring that
Right,
empathy.
because
Well, we
that
love
other
you and we
person,
understand.
that other person is going to find the place that's right for them too. So it's better for both of you.
Right. I love that. That's awesome. Very cool. Well, wrapping up, I always have three final questions and then anything we didn't touch on that you think would be really impactful for listeners. By the way, everyone will have how to contact Katie and her book and all that stuff in the show notes. So definitely feel free to reach out and do that. I know she's a very, very helpful lady, I can tell. So if you have some questions, reach out. First and final question is if someone is looking for their purpose, what's one sentence you would say that could help them find it?
What did you love to do when you were a kid? I would say go back to that.
I had to think on that one. Number two, what's a favorite quote and why?
Okay. So it's a quote from a Counting Crow song, and it is the price of a memory is the memory of the sorrow it brings. And I think that's so real in so many ways. It really just resonates with me for life can be hard, and sometimes we look back on things that were really hard for us, but because of that, we've gotten to where we are. So there's a price for that memory, but also it has driven us to the point that we're at right now.
Hmm. The price to the memory, but the price is the sorrow it brings.
The price of a memory is the memory of the sorrow it brings.
That's impressive. I love that. And third question, what's a one sentence or word that you want on your gravestone?
Impact.
Hmm. Love that. That's very cool. All right. So you run into someone in the coffee shop and they listen to this and they're going to work on empathy or leadership, which is leadership, but like the more the rule side or the empathy side, whatever, working on all the things. What's something we didn't touch on that you just think is really impactful to leave our listeners with?
I think the idea that in any role where you're in the on the dominant side, there is, I want to call it like a grieving process, that as things change, you need to leave parts of yourself behind to
Mhm.
become something new. And that doesn't mean it's bad, but it does mean that when something changes in your family, in your business, it means that you have to change and you need to be ready for that.
Be ready for change. I love that. Guys, I know you'll want to share this, share it with some families, share with some leaders. Let's go out there. If we can change one person or one starfish at a time together, we can help change the world. Thanks so much for being on, Katie.
Thank you.